make some adjustments to the audio. So I'm hoping that this audio will be a little clearer. I don't know what's happened. I'm using the same computer and the same microphone. It might just be the different acoustics here in this house compared to where I was before, but we'll get through it. And if I need to, I'll buy a microphone and we'll clean it up. But hopefully you'll be able to hear this tonight, because this is a really important topic. This is a really important topic. And I think you'll see it once we get into it. And I hope that it touches you the way that over the years it has touched me, and I've been able to learn and grow in this part of the grace of God in my life. And I have a lot more growing to do there as well. So let's go ahead and get started. As I told you on the email link, the title of this is, He Really Is That Into You. Really. You know, if you've ever been in love or infatuated with somebody, you know how stressful it can be to wonder where you stand with them. You try to read each action, and even you read into inaction as if each one of them had some hidden meaning. You read between the lines of communication, just hoping that you'll see a pattern and somehow that it will help you know for sure. I've been there. I have been right there. Sometimes even finding out that he isn't that into you is almost easier than continuing all the drama of wondering. I bet you know exactly what I'm talking about here. Also, I'm sure you've had friends that see your concern and start listing the pros and cons of the relationship to help you out. You know how they list things that mean he loves you, and then the things that mean he loves you not. And they try to make the case that he really cares, because if you fill in those blanks, look what he did for you, look at the way he looks at you, you know how they try to make that case for you. And that's what friends are for. And that's why we include them in all the details, down to the very smallest details, so that maybe they can help us be sure and off of the merry-go-round of doubt. And I'm sure you'll agree that yo-yo living, the up and down and up and down and round, wears you out. So in relationships that might be long-term, like maybe a potential spouse, or even worse, when they are your spouse, it is so wearying to not know for sure where you stand, and to not know for sure what that other person really thinks of you. Okay, now, take all of this and imagine that same uncertainty, if the relationship is the one that your life, your success, your finances, and your future in this life and in eternity depends on. What if your underlying doubts were about God himself? How he really feels about you. How he really sees you. How important are you to him? Not how important you are to his plan and purpose, but how important are you to him? How much you matter when he prepares, when he organizes his priorities and plans his resources. And just how flexible is his commitment to you? What would it take to get him to break this off? These kinds of questions remind me of some of my first job interviews as a teenager. I was so nervous. The interview itself was stressful, but then finding out that I would be on a 90-day probation was even worse. It meant that during that time, they were going to observe how I worked, how I fit in, how I responded, how I interacted, and then they were going to decide if they would keep me. And if there were benefits involved, those wouldn't even kick in until after my probation period was over. So that 90 days was to determine if I was a keeper or not. So many believers walk through life on eggshells, as if they are still on probation with God, never quite sure if He has decided to keep them, or if that's still out there, yet to be determined. Oh my goodness, this is such an important point. You know, I remember being at a friend's house a while back, spending the night while I was on a business trip. I stayed up later than they did that night and sat for a while on the living room couch, having picked up a little teeny tiny book. Now, I had been born again probably for 25 years at this point, maybe more. And I had been teaching Bible studies for 10 or 12 years at least already by that point. But as I sat there and I flipped through this teeny tiny little book called Faith Is, something amazing happened. This little book was only about this big, and it was short sayings about faith that began with, on the left-hand side of the page, it was faith is, and then on the facing page, it finished that sentence. And as I read along through this little book, I came to one that said, faith is believing that I am not on probation with God. Oh my gosh. Without warning, I started crying like a baby. I couldn't stop. It was like somebody opened the spout on the inside of me. I cried and I cried because that one little line defined my biggest fear, that somehow God might decide someday that I didn't fit, or that I didn't work out, or I wasn't doing enough. I actually cried myself to sleep that night. But the exposure of that deeply personal fear and the defining of it so I could recognize it was the beginning of a whole new dimension of my relationship with God. It was an unexpected interruption, that's for sure. But it also became a life-transforming moment, because this is a hugely important topic for you and I to settle. Just get it settled. I'm hoping tonight that I can help nudge you down the path of getting this topic settled. Think about this. Even when you go through premarital counseling, for instance, it's issues just like this one that need to be resolved in order for the relationship to actually work and be effective. In order for it to have a lasting impact on you and around you. Because if you go into a marriage worried that your spouse hasn't yet quite decided if they're in for the long haul, you can't possibly be at rest. This is so huge. But listen, we're not talking here about marriage. We're talking about God and how committed He is to you. Again, this is not about committed to His plan and purpose, but committed to you. This is not about how you fit into His plan and purpose. This is about what He thinks about you. This is a big deal. Well, there is this place in the book of Romans that kind of makes the case, I believe it does make the case, effectively makes the case, to convince you that He really is that into you. Really. And that you can't possibly miss His commitment if you take this argument into consideration. It simply leaves no doubt. This settles the matter and actually gives you the rest that you need to enjoy this journey. Come on, don't be on the journey and not enjoy it. Why go through this journey with doubt in your heart? This case is about you and God. It's not just about some guy you're interested in. No, in fact, this is the Apostle Paul himself making the case for God to you so that you won't even consider doubt. It's Paul laying out line by line what you mean to God and what God would do for you just given the chance. So he says it this way in Romans chapter 8, verse 32. Here it is, quote, "He who spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us, how shall he not also with him freely give us all things?" Here's my paraphrase. He who was unwilling to withhold his own son and not only gave him willingly, but delivered him up for you himself. He counted the cost and determined that value for value, you were worth Jesus to him. How can you even think that he who would exchange his most valued son for you wouldn't also freely give you things? If he gave this, why would he withhold that? If he didn't flinch at Jesus, why would he flinch at anything? If this kind of argument were being said by maybe one of my high school girlfriends, they'd be telling me, "Really, Jeannie? Look at what he did for you. Can't you see that he's mad about you? Can't you tell he is so into you? He would do anything for you. Don't you see that, girl?" But in this case, this is none other than the Apostle Paul making the case for the God of the universe and his thoughts about you. You. Back to Romans. What could you possibly ask for that God would have to think about it before saying yes? In this verse, Paul makes the case that if God gave his ultimate without hesitation, would he not also with him freely, without hesitation, without cost, and without limits give us all things? Again, if Jesus didn't make him hesitate, what could you possibly ask that would make him hesitate? He really is that into you. So what kind of rest would you enjoy? What kind of peace would permeate your thoughts? What kind of love would you instantly run to if you were convinced of this one reality, that he who spared not his own son, but gave him willingly for you, would not hesitate with that same son to freely give you anything? Case closed. I got to tell you, if you're not weeping at this point, or at least holding back the tears, we might need to get some cardiac paddles to restart your heart. Because seriously, this touches the deepest parts of our soul. To know that we are loved it's just nothing short of wonderful. But to know that value for value, God would choose you every time, gosh, that causes a seismic shift to occur on the inside of you. One that affects your foundational belief, and that belief is a belief of worth. What are you worth to God? Jesus. You were worth Jesus to God. Whatever else you need or want, it's but peanuts by comparison. You and I sweat sometimes about asking God for good things as if it just might be too much to ask. Health, wealth, happiness, good marriage, great kids. But really? Is that all that difficult to think that if he willingly, without hesitation, gave Jesus, would he then withhold any good thing from you? So I say ask. Just ask. Don't wait. Just ask. Because he just can't wait to say, sure, honey, I'd love to give you that. I call this an aha moment. It's an aha moment is a moment when the reality of something dawns on you, and then things so profoundly shift inside you. I've had several aha moments in the course of my walk with God, and they change everything. I'll give you an example. One of those aha moments for me was discovering that the law of Moses, as we know it, didn't apply to Gentiles. Oh, newsflash, I'm not a Gentile. So on a very practical level, it no more applied to me than Sharia law does today. You see, once you have this aha moment, you become as certain of that reality as you are that Sharia law doesn't hold any power over you today. So a Gentile back in that day could choose to be under the law of Moses, or as a servant in a house might be under the law because of their master. But the essence is that the law of Moses wasn't written for or given to the Gentiles. Galatians chapter 4 makes that abundantly clear. Well, when the discovery of that really dawns on you, aha happens. Aha. And you stop feeling like you're somehow cheating on God when you leave the law behind and run fully abandoned into grace. It establishes a twofold certainty that you were not, and now you are not meant to be under the law. First, because it didn't apply to Gentiles. Newsflash, I'm not a Gentile. And secondly, it cost God Jesus to get you out from under the curse of the law and to become the end of that for everyone who believes, fundamentally changing everything. Well, you're just going to have to trust me for right now that the certainty of being loved, that the certainty of being worth Jesus to God, it will become an aha moment for you. You just watch. I promise you it will. So we need to look for a minute at what it means to be rooted and grounded in love. Ephesians 3, verse 18 says, quote, we being rooted, that word rooted means fixed and established. You know how roots are. The deeper the root, the stronger the root, the stronger and the more stable the tree, right? Or the plant, whichever you're referring to. And we being rooted, fixed and established, and grounded, that word grounded has to do with the foundation of something. And we being rooted, fixed and established, and grounded, our very foundation in love, so that we can explore fully the depth and the length and the height and the breadth of the love of God, which even as we grow in our knowledge of it, it still passes knowledge. It is so abundantly amazing that even as we grow in it and we experience it and it becomes more and more a part of who we are, that we are loved is something that's never a question anymore. And even as we get rooted and grounded in it, it still passes knowledge because there's still more of it to discover. Well, this verse simply says that the soil that you are best planted and established in, the soil where your foundation is firm, rock solid firm, the soil where you can discover each dimension of love, even though its fullness is actually still past knowing, that soil where your soul prospers, that soil is being loved. Think about that. Knowing and embracing being loved. Loved so much that God would deliver his son for you is the soil that establishes you. It's also the soil that expands you. This soil anchors you, and it also makes you effective. This isn't talking about how much you love God. Sorry. This isn't talking about how much you love God. It's not about your obedience and your loyalty. This is about his love for you. That's what profoundly changes you. That's what solidly anchors you. That's what creates in you both the ability to love God and to love others. We're going to see that in this next passage. In 1 John chapter 4, verses 17 through 19, we find John, the disciple who Jesus loved. John, the one whose only identity was that he was loved. Think about that for a minute. John was so saturated in the knowledge of being loved that he actually becomes the expert on being loved. And it's this loved disciple who tells us in 1 John chapter 4 that perfect, fully grown love, that's love for you, takes fear itself, fear of every kind, and throws it out. And he is speaking from personal knowledge of this certainty of love. He tells us that God's love for us, as it finds its way into every thought, into every emotion, into every decision, will eliminate fear, because fear has torment. That word torment, the two words that it has to do with are chastisement and punishment. I'll come back to those two words in a little bit. But remember, there is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ. None, not at all. Love takes fear of chastisement and fear of punishment and throws it out. Now we know that life has consequences. For instance, if you sit on a couch every day and you eat potato chips, you are going to gain weight. But in your relationship with God, you are in the safest place of all to fall flat on your face without fear. Because there is no fear of chastisement or punishment there. Perfect love throws fear out so that you can stop thinking about it. Now, I love that both words, chastisement and punishment, are included in this definition of torment here in this passage. I love that because so often we readily acknowledge that we aren't being punished, but instead we say, "Oh, I'm being chastised." Well, John, the loved one, the one whose whole identity was that he was loved, profoundly disagrees with that. His personal experience tells him that neither chastisement nor punishment are torments for the believer. I want you to think about that. And then verse 19 says, we love because he loved us. It's really interesting how often this verse is misquoted. Most people quote this verse as saying, we love him because he first loved us. However, the word him does not appear in this passage. It should simply read, we love because he first loved us. This is huge because the ability and the inspiration both to love God and to love in any relationship comes as you and I embrace being loved. As you find your place of rest in being loved, relationships of every kind are impacted. By knowing the value God places on you as an individual, not as a part of his plan and purpose, but if you were the only one on the whole planet, you still would have been worth Jesus to him. We love because he first loved us. So your outreach and your effectiveness is also therefore rooted and established in your certainty that you are loved. When your certainty of your value to God finds its home in your heart, you'll start to hear his love and his commitment for you everywhere. And in some of the most unlikely places, even where it isn't intended. I recently heard a song playing in a store, and it stopped me in my tracks. Now, it's not a church song by any means. It's not meant to be anyway. But for me, it was God talking to Jeannie directly. Right then, right there. I heard it immediately as if it were being played just for me. I stood there holding on to the shopping cart, tears in my eyes, listening to every single line. And it wasn't just that time. I've heard it since then a number of times, and it does the same thing to me every single time I hear it. So a couple of weeks ago, I was getting on a plane as a tropical storm was approaching. I actually had 3 total flights that day, and each one of them was going to take me closer and closer to that storm. So as I got on that first plane, I got into my seat and I found this song on YouTube. I put my earphones on and then I sat back in my seat and I let God sing it to me. And he said, Jeannie, I'm only one call away. I'll be there to save the day. Superman's got nothing on me. I'm only one call away. And when you're weak, I'll be strong. And when you feel like hope is gone, just run into my arms. Honey, I'm only one call away. I'll be there to save the day. Girl, Superman's got nothing on me. I'm only one call away. Now, no one else on that plane had any idea that I wasn't just listening to a popular song on my headset. Oh, but I knew. I knew my God was gently reminding me that not even Superman has anything on him when it comes to how he feels about me. Because he who spared not, didn't withhold his own son, but delivered him up willingly for me, how will he not also with him freely, without limits, and at no cost to me, give me all things, things like safety, peace in the storm of weather, storms of finance, stormy relationships, storms with kids, uncertain future plans, whatever the situation. God wants to say personally to you, honey, you've got nothing to worry about. Superman's got nothing on me. I'm there. You were worth Jesus to me. Sweetie, I got this. He really is that into you. And knowing it, and resting in it, and enjoying it, and defending it will impact every part of your life. It'll impact every relationship. It'll impact every decision you make. Please allow this to sink in. Please let your heart stay and bask there. Please let your soul be embraced by his affection and love. Then in Romans 5, it says, the love of God, his love for you, his love for me, as it is shed abroad into every nook and cranny of your heart, his love for you that upholds you, both gives you hope and sustains your hope. And even when you end up going through stuff, you'll discover patience that you didn't even know you could have. And you'll discover more proof of his love than you could even imagine. And you'll discover more hope, a hope that never leaves you ashamed. Nothing to fear, nothing to sweat. All because his love for you has found its way throughout your heart until every space is filled up with love's certainty. I challenge you to find your comfortable spot there, tucked into his love for you. And by the way, go ahead and let go of probation. It is so old covenant anyway. It's over. He really is that into you. Snap, snap. Grace is being unshackled, because he who spared not his own son, but gave and delivered him up for us, how shall he not with him freely give us all things? And it's becoming a reality. Sweetie, you were worth Jesus to God. Have a great night.